No one believed her until the Mafia boss walked in and said, "I believe every word." Club Ember was built on a lie. It sold itself as exclusive, a velvet-roped slice of paradise in the concrete heart of Easton City. But it was just a high-gloss trap. Lila Moreno knew. She breathed in the lie every Friday and Saturday night, serving $500 bottles of vodka to men whose hands were worth less than the cheap glass they were holding. The club was owned by Jackson Carrick, a man who built skyscrapers that cast shadows over entire neighborhoods, and the VIP section was Lila's cage. She was good at her job. She remembered who drank what, how they liked their ice, and exactly how to smile while making her body invisible. It was a draining, precise art. Be pretty but not available. Be friendly but not familiar. Be present but leave no trace. Tonight, the air was thicker than usual, heavy with humidity and the cloying scent of synthetic cherry smoke. Trent Carrick was in... Unlike his father, who operated with the cold precision of a surgeon, Trent was a blunt instrument. He moved through the club like he owned the oxygen, his entourage of laughing, braying idiots trailing in his wake. Lila had felt his eyes on her all night, a sticky, unwelcome pressure. She'd deflected 3 of his attempts to pull her into his booth, always with a professional smile and an excuse about another table. "You're not paid to walk away from me," he'd slurred, grabbing her wrist. "I'm paid to get your next bottle. Mr. Carrick," she'd said, prying his thick fingers off her arm with a practiced twist. The last call came at 1:50 a.m. The music was a dull thud in her skull. She was running her final tray of empty glasses back to the service bar, her feet screaming in their mandated heels. When the hand clamped over her mouth, it happened fast, faster than she could have imagined. One second she was in the strobe of the hallway, the next she was in the pitch black of a back storeroom. The smell of stale beer and bleach, the click of a lock. Trent Carrick's voice, no longer slurring but sharp with a chilling, sober hunger. "You think you're too good for me? You think you can say no to me?" She fought. She kicked and scratched and bit, a wild animal trapped, but he was bigger, and the sound of her own uniform ripping was louder than her muffled screams. When he was done, he just stood up, smoothed his designer shirt, and spat on the floor near her head. Felt good, didn't it? You know you wanted it. He opened the door and was gone. For a full minute, Lila didn't move. She lay on the cold tile, her body a map of new, aching pain. The thud of the bass from the club floor felt like it was inside her chest, trying to restart a heart that had gone silent. Then, a wave of cold, sharp adrenaline hit her. She pulled herself up, her limbs shaking. She didn't wipe the tears. She didn't fix her hair. She found her torn shirt in the darkness, clutched it to her chest, and ran. She ran out the service exit, into the alley, past the dumpsters, and didn't stop until she was under the sodium yellow lights of the street. Hailing a cab she couldn't afford, the driver looked at her messed up face and the spreading bruise on her jaw and didn't say a word. He just drove her to the 14th precinct. The station was a fluorescent-lit hell. It smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. The officer at the desk, a man whose gut strained against the buttons of his blue shirt, looked at her like she was a piece of trash that had blown in off the street. "I need to report an assault," she said, her voice cracking. He sighed, slow and annoyed, as if she'd asked him to solve a complex math problem. "Fill this out. Sit over there." She waited for 2 hours. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the cheap pen. When they finally called her into a small, gray room, 2 officers listened, their faces set in stone. One was young, tapping his pen on his notepad. The other was older, jaded, with eyes that had seen too much and decided to see nothing at all. She told them everything: the club, the storeroom, the name. The moment Trent Carrick left her lips, the atmosphere in the room changed. The young cop stopped tapping his pen. The older one leaned back, crossing his arms. "Trent Carrick," the older one repeated, not as a question, but as a statement of impossibility. "Jackson Carrick's son." "Yes," Lila whispered, tasting blood on her lip. "You're sure about that?" Yes, I work there. I know who he is. And you were in a storeroom with him, alone. He dragged me in. I told you. The older cop held up a hand. Look, miss, we get a lot of situations like this, especially from places like Ember. People drink. Things get messy. Stories get confused. I am not confused, Lila said, a thread of steel entering her voice. I was assaulted. Right, we'll take the report. We'll look into it. Go to the hospital, get a kit done if you want. His tone said it was a waste of time. They sent her out into the pre-dawn gray. The hospital was another blur of cold hands, cold instruments, and colder questions. They gave her a pamphlet and a prescription for a pill she couldn't afford. She walked the 3 miles back to her apartment as the sun came up, feeling like a ghost in her own skin. She slept for 4 hours, a dead, dreamless sleep. She woke up to her phone buzzing. It was her manager from Ember. Lila, he said, his voice slick with false sympathy. We heard what happened. Terrible. Just a terrible misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, she said, her throat raw. Yeah, well, about that. Jackson Carrick himself sends his regrets about the confusion. He's very generous. He's decided to offer you a severance, a substantial one, to help you transition to a less stressful job, a severance. And of course, we'll need you to sign a small document, just standard procedure, to say this whole thing is settled, that you won't be spreading rumors. Lila felt a cold, clean rage cut through the fog. You're firing me. It's for the best. Lila, we can't have this kind of drama. It's bad for business. He assaulted me. Lila. The manager's voice hardened. He's offering you $10,000. I'd take it. It's more than you're worth. Go to hell, she said. Wrong answer, sweetheart. He hung up. An hour later, her world ended. Her phone lit up again, this time with a text from her sister, Sarah. It wasn't a question. It was a link to a gossip blog, the kind that fed on the scraps of the Easton City elite. The headline was brutal. Ember waitress tries to extort Carrick heir. Fired for theft. There was a photo of her, a grainy shot from the club's Employee of the Month board, smiling like an idiot. The article was short and vicious. It claimed she, Lila Moreno, had been caught stealing from the register, and when confronted had tried to seduce and blackmail Trent Carrick. It mentioned her firing. It mentioned her history of instability. Lila, what is this? Sarah's next text read, Mom is hysterical. Did you try to steal from them? Lila stared at the words. Did you try to steal? Not. Are you okay? Not. I'm coming over. He attacked me. Sarah, she texted back, her fingers numb. Lila, these are the Carricks. You don't just accuse them. People are saying you were all over him, that you wanted it. Who is saying that? Everyone. My boss just asked me about it. It's all over the place. They're saying the police have no report. Lila called the 14th precinct. She asked for the older officer. She was put on hold for 20 minutes. Finally, a new voice came on the line. I'm sorry, ma'am. We have no report filed under your name for an assault last night. It seems there was a clerical error. The paperwork was misfiled. It's gone. Gone? What do you mean, gone? I was there. I signed it. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing I can do. The line clicked. She called the club, demanding to see the surveillance footage. The manager laughed. What footage? The cameras in that hallway were, coincidentally, being serviced last night. Such bad luck. Now, lose this number. The next week was a descent. Her friends, co-workers from the club, went silent. The few who did reply sent short, awkward messages about how they couldn't get involved. Her sister stopped returning her calls, sending a final text that said, I just think you should have taken the money. Lila, now you've ruined everything. She was fired. She was a liar. She was a thief. She was a whore. The city had passed its judgment. The $10,000 she hadn't taken was the $10,000 she needed for rent. The eviction notice was bright pink, taped to her door like a badge of shame. She packed 2 suitcases and moved into the Easton Motor Inn. It was a place on the edge of the highway, a crumbling motel where the rooms were rented by the hour and the ice machine had been broken since the 90s. The wallpaper peeled in damp strips, and the air smelled like mold and cigarettes. She spent her last few $100s on bus fare. Going from one lawyer's office to the next, they were all the same. Plush carpets, expensive art, and polite, firm rejections. The Carricks, you say? Miss Moreno. I'm afraid our firm has a conflict of interest. We just don't feel you have a strong enough case. Frankly, your reputation online makes this unwinnable. She was broke. She was alone. She was nothing. Miles away, in a building that didn't have a name on the door, Vincent DeLuca was watching a video. His office was dark, paneled in old, rich mahogany that had absorbed a century of cigar smoke and hard decisions. He didn't like noise, and there had been noise coming from Ember, one of the many businesses in Easton City that paid him for security and sanitation, which meant they paid him to not exist. His bartender, Sal, a man who had been with him for 20 years, had been the one to mention it. Boss. Sal had said that morning, polishing a glass until it squeaked. You heard about that girl causing noise at Ember. Vincent had grunted, sipping his espresso. Noise is noise. Sal, it gets handled. Sal stopped polishing. It was a small act of defiance, but a significant one. This wasn't noise, Mr. DeLuca, it was real. Vincent looked up. Sal's face was grim. It was Lila. Good kid, quiet, never took a free drink, never played the game. She always tipped out the barbacks, even when her tips were light. Sal's eyes met Vincent's in the mirror. I saw her. When she ran out the back, they said she was stealing. She wasn't stealing, she was hurt, bad, her face, and her shirt was torn. He did it. Boss, the Carrot Kid. He did it, and now they're burying her. Vincent DeLuca did not care about the Carricks. He did not care about Club Ember. He did not, as a rule, care about good kids. But he cared about Sal, and he hated men who used their father's name as a weapon. He hated sloppy, public violence. It was bad for business. Show me, Vincent said. It wasn't the official club feed. That, he knew, would be clean. This was his feed, from 3 pinhole cameras Sal had installed years ago. Cameras Jackson Carrick didn't know existed. He didn't watch the assault. He didn't need to. He watched the 5 hours leading up to it. He watched Lila Moreno. He watched her anxious energy, the way her eyes constantly scanned the room. Not for fun, but for threats. He watched her serve Trent Carrick, her body language a fortress of professionalism. He watched her refuse the drink he sent her, a polite, "I'm working, sir." He watched her sidestep his hand on her waist, a fluid, practiced motion. He watched her walk away, and he saw the small, terrified tremor in her hands as she gripped her empty tray. She wasn't a thief. She wasn't a seductress. She was a deer in a forest full of wolves. He became curious. He made a call. An hour later, he knew where she was. The hallway of the Easton Motor Inn was a special kind of hell. The carpet was sticky, and the single, buzzing light bulb cast a sickly yellow glow. Lila was sitting on the floor, her back against her cheap suitcase, her face buried in her hands. She was done. The manager, a man with a stained undershirt and breath like sour milk, had just taken her key. "Payments due, sweetheart." Time to check out. She had nowhere to go, no one to call. The sobs came from a place so deep and broken, she didn't recognize the sound. She was barefoot, her shoes having been left inside. She was crying so hard she didn't hear the footsteps. He just appeared, a shadow in the dim light. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so perfectly tailored it seemed like a part of him. He wasn't looking at the manager. He wasn't looking at the peeling wallpaper. He was looking only at her. His face was all hard angles and shadows, his eyes dark and unreadable. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like the end of the world. The manager, who had been about to kick her suitcase, froze. He seemed to shrink, recognizing a power he didn't understand but knew to fear. The man in the suit ignored him completely. His voice, when he spoke, was low, not loud, but it filled the entire hallway. It was like gravel wrapped in velvet. "I'll give you a ride." Lila's head snapped up. She stared at him through her tear-blurred vision. Who was he? He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a lawyer. He was something else. I don't... She started. He didn't offer again. He just waited. She looked at the filthy carpet. She looked at the door to the room she could no longer enter. She looked at the manager, who was now sweating. She looked back at the stranger. She had two choices, this hallway or this man. They were both a dark, unknown void, but the hallway was an ending. The man. The man was a question. Slowly, she stood up. Her legs were unsteady. She didn't have her shoes. He didn't seem to notice or care. He turned and walked toward the exit. He didn't check to see if she was following. He knew she would. She picked up her suitcase and followed him, her bare feet silencing her steps on the grimy floor. The car was a black sedan, so clean it looked wet in the motel's flickering neon. He opened the passenger door for her. She hesitated, her hand on the handle. This was insane, getting in a car with a man she didn't know. But what did she have to lose? Her reputation. Gone, her job gone, her safety a joke. She got in. The leather was cold against her skin. The inside of the car was silent, smelling of nothing but clean, expensive leather. He got in the driver's side, and the engine started with a sound so quiet it was barely a whisper. He drove. He didn't ask where she was going. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't speak at all. They glided through the streets of Easton City, the world outside the tinted windows looking like a movie she was no longer part of. She watched the familiar, hateful landmarks pass by, feeling strangely calm. The fear had burned itself out, leaving only a hollow exhaustion. After 10 minutes, he turned into an underground entrance. A heavy steel gate rumbled shut behind them, sealing them in a large, secure garage. It was brightly lit and contained only 3 other immaculate, dark cars. He parked in a spot far from the others and cut the engine. The sudden, absolute silence was deafening. Lila's heart, which she thought had given up, started a slow, heavy drumbeat. This was it. The alley, the storeroom. It was all happening again. She braced, her hand instinctively going for the door handle that wasn't there. He didn't move toward her. He didn't even look at her right away. He just sat, his large hands resting on the steering wheel. Finally, he turned his head. The dim light of the garage cast shadows under his high cheekbones. His eyes were fixed on her, and for the first time, she saw something in them. It wasn't pity. It wasn't lust. It was something harder. Recognition, he spoke, and the 2 words hit her with the force of a physical blow, realigning her entire world. I believe every word. Lila woke up to the smell of coffee and clean sheets. For a moment, she was suspended in a warm, comfortable void, her body heavy with a sleep so deep it felt like a drowning. Then, the memories crashed in, the motel, the car, the man. Her eyes flew open. This was not the Easton Motor Inn. She was in a bedroom that was larger than her entire apartment. The walls were a soft, muted gray, and one entire wall was a sheet of glass, revealing a staggering view of Easton City from what must have been 50 stories up. The sun was just beginning to burn the morning mist off the river. The sheets she was tangled in were not just clean. They were heavy, expensive cotton, softer than anything she had ever felt. She sat up, her head swimming. She was not in her own clothes. Her filthy, torn uniform was gone. She was wearing a pair of soft, gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt, both ridiculously large on her, but unmistakably clean. On the bedside table, a silver tray held a porcelain cup of steaming coffee, a glass of water, and a plate with a simple pastry. Her first instinct was panic. It rose in her throat like bile. She had been drugged. He had brought her here, undressed her, and... what? She threw the blankets off and stood, her bare feet sinking into a thick wool rug. She checked herself. Her body was still sore from the assault, the bruises on her jaw and ribs a dull, throbbing purple, but there was no new pain. She felt untouched. The clothes were just clothes. Suspicious. Every nerve ending screaming. She ignored the food and went to the door. It was a solid, heavy slab of dark wood. She turned the handle. It was unlocked. She opened it a crack and peered out. A long hallway. floors of polished marble, walls adorned with art that looked like it belonged in a museum. The apartment was silent, sterile, and vast. She padded down the hall, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had to get out. She found the front door, a massive, intimidating piece of metal and wood. She reached for the handle, a heavy, intricate brass lock. "I wouldn't—" The voice came from behind her. She spun around, her hand flying to her chest. A man, built like a refrigerator and wearing a suit that looked just as expensive as his boss's, was standing at the end of the hall. He wasn't threatening. He was just there. A fact. A wall. "He wants you to stay," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "For now. For your safety." "My safety?" Lila's voice was a ragged whisper. "I don't even know who he is. I don't know where I am. You're in Mr. DeLuca's penthouse, and he is the man who believed you." The man gestured back down the hall. "He's waiting for you. Breakfast is ready." Lila looked at the impassive face of the man mountain, then at the locked door. She had no money, no shoes, no phone. She was a prisoner in a palace. Defeated, but with a spark of defiance still burning. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm not hungry." "You should eat," the man said, his expression unchanged. "He doesn't like to waste food." She was given no choice. She was escorted, not by force, but by a sheer, immovable presence, to a dining room that overlooked the city. Vincent DeLuca was sitting at the head of a long, dark table, reading a physical newspaper, a white ceramic mug in his hand. He looked up when she entered, and his dark eyes settled on her. He was different in the daylight, sharper, more defined. The shadows of the garage had hidden the fine lines of concentration around his eyes, the faint silver creeping at his temples. He was wearing a simple black Henley, and she could see the defined muscles of his forearms. He looked less like a phantom and more like a predator at rest. "Sit," he said. It was not a request. Lila sat at the far end of the table, as far from him as she could get. The man mountain disappeared, in front of her. A place was set. Eggs, bacon, fresh fruit. It was more food than she had seen in a week. Her stomach betrayed her with a loud, humiliating growl. Vincent folded his newspaper and placed it precisely on the table. He didn't smile. He just watched her. "Eat, Lila." She stared at the food, then at him. "What is this? What do you want? You said you believed me. People don't just say that. Not to me. I don't say things I don't mean." He pushed a plate of toast toward the center of the table, a pointless gesture given the distance between them. "I want my version of the truth." "Your version?" "The police have their version. The Carricks have theirs. The internet has theirs. They are all lies. I want your version. I want the truth." Lila picked up a fork, her hand shaking so badly she immediately put it back down. "Why?" "Because I am a man who likes to have the correct information." He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. His calm was more unnerving than any anger she had ever faced. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." And so, she did. It came out in a trickle, then a flood. She told him about the VIP section, the sticky feel of Trent's eyes on her all night, the way he grabbed her wrist. She told him about the storeroom, the smell of bleach, the sound of her own shirt ripping. She told him about the two cops, the one who tapped his pen and the one who looked bored. She told him about the misfiled report, the disappearing footage, the $10,000 offer, and the phone call with her sister. She spoke, and he listened. He did not interrupt. He did not nod or offer sympathy. His face remained perfectly, terrifyingly still. He just watched her. When she got to the part about her sister believing the blogs, her voice finally broke. The dam of control she had maintained for a week shattered, and she covered her face, the sobs racking her body. They were ugly, painful sounds, torn from the deepest part of her. She cried for a full minute, and all she heard was the sound of her own despair in the silent, expensive room. When she finally managed to look up, wiping her face with the back of the oversized t-shirt, his expression was unchanged. His face was a mask of stone, but his hands, which were resting on the table, were not. His knuckles were bone white. He was gripping the edge of the heavy table so hard. His fingertips were pale. It was the only sign of the rage simmering beneath the surface. He let go of the table, a slow, deliberate uncurling of his fingers. He stood up. "I have what I need," he said. He walked to the window, his back to her, and looked out over his city. He pulled a phone from his pocket. She watched as he made 2 calls. His voice was low, and she couldn't hear the words, but the tone was absolute. It was the sound of command. When he was done, he turned back to her. "My fixer is handling it. He will find the deleted footage. He will persuade the doctor who signed your ER report to release the original, unaltered records." Lila stared at him, bewildered. "How? How can you just do that? The police couldn't. The lawyers wouldn't. The police work for Carrick. The lawyers work for money. I work for myself." He walked over to her, and she instinctively flinched, pulling her chair back. He stopped a few feet away. "You are safe here. My men are downstairs. No one will get to you. Eat, sleep for the next 24 hours. Just heal. That is your only job." He left the room, leaving her alone with a feast she still couldn't touch and a silence that was heavier than any noise. Lila spent the day in a confused haze. She was in a cage, but it was a gilded one. The guest room had an attached bathroom that was all marble and glass, with a shower that had 10 different nozzles. In the closet, someone had left new clothes, simple, unbranded items in her size: jeans, soft sweaters, underwear, socks. There was no explanation. She explored the penthouse, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. It was less a home and more a fortress, minimalist, cold and perfect. There was no clutter, no photographs, no personal items, save for a wall of old, leather-bound books that seemed out of place. She felt the confusion warring with her fear. For the first time in a week, she was not hungry. She was not cold. She was not in immediate danger of being thrown onto the street. This man, Vincent, had provided for her basic needs in a way no one else had. But he was not a good man. She knew it in her bones. The way he moved, the way his men obeyed, the deadness in his eyes. This was a man who lived in the violence she had only just tasted. She was safe from the Carricks, but was she safe from him? That night, the silence of the penthouse was broken. Lila was in the guest room, trying to read one of the leather-bound books, when she heard it, a muffled shout, not from the hallway, but from another part of the apartment. It was a man's voice, high with panic, then a sound, a dull, wet thud, like a side of beef being dropped on a concrete floor. Another shout, this one cut off, then Vincent's voice, not loud but carrying a chilling, absolute cold. "You went near her. You opened your mouth. You thought I wouldn't find out." Another thud. This one was sharper. It was followed by a choked, gasping sound. Lila's blood ran cold. She crept out of her room, her heart hammering. The sounds were coming from the main living area. She stayed in the shadows of the hallway, peering around the corner. Vincent was there, his back to her. The man Mountain from the hallway, whose name she had learned was Rocco, was standing by the door. And on the floor, in the center of the expansive room, was a man. He was one of Carrick's goons, a bouncer from Ember she recognized. His face was a bloody mess. Vincent was rolling his shoulders, his sleeves pushed up to his elbows. He hadn't brutalized the man. That wasn't the right word. He had dismantled him. "You tried to intimidate the other waitress," Vincent said, his voice a calm, conversational monotone. He nudged the man's ribs with the toe of his expensive shoe. The man groaned. "You told her to keep her mouth shut about what she saw that night. You told her what would happen to her. What happened to Lila? Carrick paid," the man gurgled, spitting blood onto the pristine marble. "He paid you to be stupid," Vincent said. He looked at Rocco. "Get him out of here. Send him back to Carrick, in a box. A nice one." "Boss," Rocco said, his voice flat. "Wait." Vincent knelt, grabbing the man's hair and yanking his head back. He wasn't looking at the goon. He was looking at the shadows in the hallway. He was looking right at Lila. "Tell him," Vincent said, that, his voice loud enough for her to hear, that this is what happens when you touch my things. Rocco hauled the semi-conscious man to his feet and dragged him out, leaving a smear of blood on the floor. Lila was frozen, her hand over her mouth. She was shaking, not with fear, but with a horrifying mix of terror and something else. Vindication. Vincent stood up. He looked at the blood on his knuckles as if it were dirt. He walked to the bar, poured a glass of water, and used a bar towel to wipe his hands with methodical precision. "You shouldn't be awake," he said, not looking at her. She stepped out of the shadows, her bare feet sticking slightly to the floor. You're a monster." He turned, his face unreadable. "Yes, you almost killed him." "He was lucky," Vincent said, tossing the blood-stained towel onto the bar. "He tried to silence a witness. He put his hands on someone who worked with you. He was enforcing Carrick's lie, and you are here. So, yes, he was very lucky." "That's not justice," she whispered, her voice trembling. That's just violence. Justice is a word rich men use to protect themselves." He walked toward her, and she forced herself not to step back. He stopped in front of her. "Men like Carrick, men who hide behind laws they paid for. I don't play fair, Lila. Not with men like him." His proximity was overwhelming. He smelled of soap and, faintly, of the iron in the blood he had just shed. "You're no better than he is," she said, the words costing her. "You're wrong," he said, his voice dropping, becoming softer and somehow more dangerous. "He does it for pleasure, for sport. I do it for balance." The argument, the accusation died in her throat. She looked at him, at the man who had ordered breakfast for her, who had given her clean clothes, and who had just beaten a man half to death in her name. "Why?" she asked, the single word encompassing everything. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" For the first time, the mask cracked. A shadow of something deep and old passed over his features, a profound sadness. "I knew someone," he said, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "A long time ago. She was like you, all fight and no one in her corner." He looked away from her, toward the wall of windows, at the city lights that looked like a carpet of fallen stars. "She told me she was in trouble, and I was busy. I was building this." He gestured vaguely at the room, at his empire. "I told her to be strong. I told her I would handle it when I had time." He turned back to her, and his eyes were hollow. "By the time I had time, she was gone. She gave up. They broke her, and I wasn't there to stop it. I failed to protect her." Lila stared at him. The monster was gone. In his place was a man, haunted and raw. "I'm not her," Lila whispered. "No," he said, his gaze dropping to her bruised jaw, his expression hardening again. You're still here. You're still fighting." He raised his hand, not fast, but slow, giving her time to pull away. His fingers, rough and calloused, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was surprisingly gentle. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just breathed. "Thank you," she said. The words were trembling, just like her body. For believing me. For this." He leaned in, his eyes searching hers. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the water he had used to wash his hands. He was so close. Her heart was a trapped bird. "You don't owe me anything," he whispered, his lips inches from hers. She didn't pull away. She didn't know how. She was so tired of fighting, so tired of being alone, and this man, this killer, this savior, was the first person to look at her like she was real. When his lips met hers, it wasn't a kiss of passion, it was a kiss of gravity, a slow, tentative connection. It was hesitant, almost questioning, as if he was as surprised as she was. His lips were firm, and he tasted faintly of the water he'd been drinking. He didn't force her. He didn't demand. He just offered. Lila's eyes fluttered closed, and a small, broken sound escaped her. She raised her hands, not to push him away, but to steady herself, her palms resting flat against the hard muscle of his chest. He was solid, real. He deepened the kiss slightly, a small pressure, and she felt a tremor go through him. He pulled back, just enough to rest his forehead against hers. His breath was warm on her face. He cupped her jaw with one hand, his thumb stroking the unbruised skin near her ear. "You don't owe me anything, Mai," he repeated, his voice a low, rough growl. "But I'll burn the city for you if I have to." The first ripple was a carefully worded press release. Trent Carrick, it seemed, had suddenly embarked on a much-needed vacation to an undisclosed location in Europe. His father, Jackson Carrick, followed this with his own televised statement, standing in front of his newest glass and steel tower, a monument to his power. He was all practiced sympathy and cold steel. He denied everything. He spoke of opportunistic falsehoods and the tragic instability of some young women. He called Lila's accusations a vile, baseless attempt at extortion. The city, eager to believe the powerful, began to nod in agreement. But in the shadows of the city, Vincent DeLuca was moving. He did not care about the press. He cared about leverage, his fixer, a man with no name who moved through the city like a ghost, had delivered the first piece. It was a grainy, time-stamped video from an ATM across the street from Club Ember, footage the police had overlooked. It showed, in perfect, damning clarity, Trent Carrick's blue sports car parked in the alley for exactly 45 minutes, the same 45 minutes Lila was in that storeroom. The second piece was a phone call, made from a secure line in Vincent's penthouse to a judge with a gambling problem. Vincent's voice was calm. He did not threaten. He simply reminded the judge that certain debts were best paid with favors, not cash. He explained that a misfiled report was a stain on the city's justice system. He said, merely a concerned citizen. 2 days later, Lila's case was quietly reopened, citing new evidence, and transferred to a different jurisdiction, one where Carrick's influence was a river, not an ocean. The third piece came from a private investigator Vincent had on retainer, a man who specialized in digging up the bones of the city's elite. The report was thin, but what it contained was potent. 2 other allegations against Trent, both from several years prior. One a cocktail waitress in a different city, another a college classmate. Both women had been paid, threatened, and silenced. Their stories were eerily, sickeningly identical to Lila's. "It's a pattern," Vincent said, placing the file on the glass table between them. Lila, however, was not content to be a protected doll in a glass tower. The safety was real, but it felt passive, and she was done being passive. She had spent the first few days healing, sleeping 12 hours at a time, eating the food that appeared as if by magic. But the idleness was eating at her. "I need to do something," she told him one evening, finding him in his office. The room was dark, save for the green glow of a desk lamp illuminating a stack of ledgers. "You are doing something," he said, not looking up from his work. "You are staying safe. That's not a job, it's a condition." She walked closer, her bare feet silent on the rug. "I'm not a child, Vincent, and I'm not a pet. I can't just sit here. I'll go insane." He finally looked up. His eyes scanned her face, seeing the resolve there, the spark that had drawn him in. He had expected fear, gratitude, dependence. He had not expected strength. "I don't have normal jobs, Lila. I don't want a normal job. I saw your desk. It's a mess." She pointed to a teetering stack of unanswered mail, invoices, and folders. "You're running an empire, and you're apparently doing it without a filing system. Let me help. I'm organized, I'm smart, and I'm the only person in this city who can't be bought by Jackson Carrick." A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. He leaned back in his chair and gestured to the pile. "Be my guest." It was a test. She knew it. The next morning, she started. She woke up at 7, dressed in the new jeans and sweaters he had provided, and went to work. At first, it was just screening calls. Men with rough voices, calling from shipping companies or sanitation unions. She learned to field their requests, to be polite but firm, to take messages with perfect, unflustered clarity. Rocco, his main bodyguard, watched her with a baffled respect. Then, she tackled the files. His business was vast. It was a spiderweb of legitimate fronts and shadow operations. construction companies, high-end restaurants, import-export businesses, and the private security firms that protected them all. Lila organized them. She created spreadsheets. She cross-referenced invoices. She learned the language of his world. She saw the violence, but it was buried in numbers. Hazard removal, security consultation, conflict resolution. She also saw the control. He was meticulous. He was a businessman, just one who operated with a different set of rules. She felt useful. More than useful, she felt necessary. She was no longer a victim waiting for rescue. She was a functioning, vital part of the machine. One night, she was poring over a set of contracts for one of his construction firms, trying to find a discrepancy she felt in her gut. "Why do you keep this one on the payroll?" she asked, not looking up. "Marco's crew, their numbers are sloppy. They've been over budget on the last 3 projects, and their material requisitions are inflated. You're being stolen from." She looked up and found him watching her, his expression unreadable. He was leaning against the doorframe, a glass of water in his hand. "Marco," Vincent said, walking into the room, "is my cousin. His father was my father's right hand." "Oh," Lila flushed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You're right." He took the file from her hand, his eyes scanning the page she had marked. "He's sloppy, and he's stealing. He thinks because we share blood. I am blind." "What will you do?" she asked, her voice small. He was evasive, as he always was when she asked about the darker side of the business. "I will handle it. It will be rebalanced." "You don't just fire people, do you?" He looked at her, his gaze intense. Sometimes, a conversation is enough. Sometimes a lesson is required, but I don't let my family sink my ship. Lila, ever. He was slowly, carefully, opening up. He told her about his father, the man who had built this empire from nothing, and the code he had lived by. He never spoke of the woman he had failed to protect. But Lila felt her presence in the room whenever he spoke of his past. The work was grueling. They fell into a rhythm, often working late into the night, the two of them alone in the vast, silent office, the city glittering below them. One night, she was so tired her vision was blurring. She was on the floor, surrounded by file boxes, trying to make sense of a decade's worth of union contracts. "I think I'm done," she murmured, rubbing her temples. She heard him stand, felt his shadow fall over her. He was standing right above her. She looked up. He didn't offer a hand to help her up. Instead, he simply bent, slid one arm under her back and one under her knees, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. "Vincent, what?" "You're done," he said. He didn't carry her to her room. He walked to his massive desk chair, sat down and settled her in his lap, tucking her against his chest as if she belonged there. She was rigid at first, her body a taut wire. This was too intimate, too possessive. She was his assistant, his ward. What was she? "It's fine, Lila," he said, his voice a low rumble in his chest, his arms a steel band around her. "Just be still for 1 minute." She didn't fight. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and her body, exhausted, went lax. She rested her head against the solid wall of his chest. His heart was a slow, steady, powerful beat beneath her ear. It was the most comforting sound she had ever heard. They sat in silence for a long time, just the sound of their breathing and the distant city. "I don't feel broken anymore," she whispered, the confession surprising her. She said it to his shirt. "All those weeks, I felt like a piece of shattered glass, like I would never be whole again." She tilted her head back to look at him. His dark eyes were on her, intense and focused. "Not with you. When I'm with you, I just feel real." He lowered his head, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You were never broken," he said, his voice rough. "You were just bent. They tried to snap you." He kissed her. It wasn't the tentative, questioning kiss from before. This was a kiss of certainty. It was slow and deep and absolute. It was a claiming. She answered it. her hands moving from his chest to his shoulders, then to his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming a desperate, hungry thing. It was about everything they weren't saying. It was about her fear and his rage. It was about her survival and his redemption. He broke the kiss, his breathing ragged, and buried his face in the curve of her neck. "Lila," he breathed, his voice thick. He stood, lifting her with him, and carried her from the office, through the dark, silent penthouse, and into his bedroom. His room was not like hers. It was darker, simpler, and the massive bed dominated the space. The entire wall was glass, and the moon was a silver disk hanging over the city. He set her down gently on the bed. He did not throw her. He did not push. He placed her on the expensive comforter, and then he stood back, his eyes devouring her. "If this isn't what you want," he said, his voice a strained rasp, "you tell me. You tell me to walk away, and I will." Lila looked at this powerful, dangerous man who was offering her a choice when everyone else had only taken... She didn't say a word. She just held out her hand. He came to her, taking her hand in his large, rough palm swallowing hers. He knelt on the bed, moving over her, but he didn't lie down. He braced himself on his arms, caging her, looking down at her. "I am afraid," she whispered, the admission costing her. "Not of me," he said. It wasn't a question. "You are safe. Here, with me. You are always safe." He kissed her again, slow and deliberate, a promise. His hands went to the hem of her sweater, pausing, asking for permission. She gave it with a small nod. He pulled it over her head. He didn't rush. He took his time, his eyes, his hands, his mouth learning every inch of her. He kissed the fading bruise on her jaw, his lips gentle. He kissed the place on her ribs that was still tender. He was not just making love to her. He was erasing the past. He was rewriting her story with his touch. Their intimacy was slow, an intense, unfolding thing. It was a build of pressure, a quiet burn. His voice was low in her ear, a constant reassurance. "You're safe. You're mine. Always." He moved with a control that was both terrifying and comforting. He held himself back, giving her everything, taking her to a place where the fear couldn't follow. When she finally shattered, calling his name, it felt like a release, not just of pleasure, but of all the pain she had held inside. He followed, his own control breaking, a low groan torn from his chest as he buried himself in her, holding her so tightly she felt like they were one person. The next morning, the world changed. They walked out of the penthouse elevator at 9 a.m. Vincent was in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, Lila in a simple, elegant dark blue dress he had acquired for her. Her hair was pulled back, her face clean of makeup, save for the confidence she now wore like armor. Vincent didn't just hold her hand as they walked through the lobby. He entwined his fingers with hers, a possessive public claim. When they stepped out of the building and onto the courthouse steps, the world exploded. The tabloids, tipped off by an anonymous source, were waiting. A wall of flashbulbs went off, a dozen strobing lights that made Lila flinch. Reporters shouted, their voices a chaotic wall of sound. "Mr. DeLuca, is it true you're protecting her? Lila, are you his new mistress? Is this a Mafia power play, Vincent?" Vincent didn't look at them. He kept his eyes forward, his expression carved from granite. He put his free hand on the small of Lila's back, a simple, protective gesture, and guided her through the sea of rabid press. He was a shark moving through minnows. They parted for him, the fear he inspired stronger than their hunger for a story. He led her up the steps and into the courthouse for a pre-trial meeting with the new prosecutor. He hadn't just brought her, he had announced her. He had drawn a line in the sand. She was not a victim. She was not alone. She was with him. The explosion in the press was immediate. Every blog, every news station, every paper ran the photo. The quiet Mafia boss and the victim hand in hand, a king and his new, mysterious consort. And with that exposure, the wolves started to circle. Vincent's enemies, both in the streets and in the police precincts, had long waited for a chink in his armor. He was too disciplined, too controlled, too solitary. Now, he had a weakness, a public, breathing vulnerability. Rival gangs began testing his territories, a small shipment lost at the docks, a bar fight in one of his clubs that was more than just a fight. Even the police, many of whom were on Carrick's payroll, felt emboldened. Vincent's businesses were suddenly plagued by inspections and audits. Lila saw none of it. Vincent shielded her completely, but she felt the change. She felt the tension in him when he came home at night, the new, harder edge to his voice on the phone. One afternoon, she was alone in the penthouse. She had turned on the television for background noise, something she rarely did. A daytime news panel was on, discussing the DeLuca-Carrick feud. A smug woman with sharp blonde hair was talking. But let's be realistic. This girl, Lila Moreno, is no innocent. She tries to extort a rich kid, fails, and then what? She just happens to land in the lap of the most powerful and most dangerous man in the city. This isn't a rescue. It's a career move. Another pundit laughed. I'll say, she's the Mafia's new mall. I wonder what she had to do to earn that kind of protection. The blood drained from Lila's face. The room began to spin. She wasn't safe. She was just a different kind of victim, a different kind of headline. She had traded one cage for another. The shame, the acidic, familiar taste of it flooded her. She couldn't breathe. The perfect, sterile air of the penthouse was suffocating. She ran from the room, from the voice on the television, not knowing where she was going. She found the service door, the one the staff used, and wrenched it open. She found herself in a cold, concrete stairwell. It smelled of dust and old paint. It was gray and ugly, and in that moment, it was the only real place in the world. She sank onto the steps, her back against the cold wall, and the tears she had refused to shed finally came. She cried, not for what Carrick had done, but for what she had become. She didn't hear him approach. The concrete steps had muffled his expensive shoes. This is not where you belong. She looked up, her face stained with tears. Vincent was standing 3 steps below her, his dark suit a stark contrast to the gray, dusty environment. He looked out of place, but his eyes were only on her. He sat down on the step beside her, ignoring the dust, ignoring the billion-dollar view he had left behind. He didn't try to coddle her. He didn't shush her. He just sat, a solid, immovable presence in her storm. They're calling me your whore, she whispered, the word tasting like ash. They're saying I did this for you, that I'm just a part of your game. He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out, not to her face, but to her hand, which was clenched on her knee. He simply covered it with his own. I know, he said. Is it true? She asked, her voice breaking. Am I just a weakness? Am I making this all worse for you? He turned, his body angling toward her, and he held her. He just pulled her against his side, his arm wrapping around her shoulders, holding her tightly. They laugh, he said, his voice a low, cold fury that vibrated through her. They mock you. They sit in their safe, bright rooms, and they laugh. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, his gaze burning with an intensity that stopped her tears. If they laugh, he said, it's because they've never bled, but they will. The war room was not a room at all. It was the penthouse office, after midnight, smelling of stale coffee and Vincent's quiet, simmering rage. The men who came to see him were ghosts, shadows in expensive suits who arrived via the private elevator and left without a sound. Enzo, Vincent's consigliere, was not a ghost. He was a piece of the city's foundation, an old man with eyes that had seen 3 generations of DeLucas rise and rule. He did not fear Vincent, he feared for him. It is a liability, Vincent, Enzo said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He was sitting in the leather chair opposite Vincent's desk, his hands steepled. I am not speaking of the girl. I am speaking of the volume of the attention. Lila was in the adjoining study, which she had converted into her own office. She had been reconciling the accounts for one of the construction firms, but the raised, insistent murmur of Enzo's voice had pulled her from her work. The door was cracked, just enough for her to hear. "The Carricks are old money, but they are stupid money," Enzo continued, his tone methodical. "You are at war with a child, and his father is a fool who thinks his checkbook is a shield. This you can handle, but the police? The rivals? They see this girl, and they do not see a person. They see a handle, a lever to pull." "She is not a lever." Vincent's voice was flat, cold. "She is a spotlight." Enzo's voice rose, a rare break in his control. "She has put your name on television, in the mouths of idiots. Every enemy we have is watching. They see you. The man who moves in silence, walking into a courthouse holding her hand. They see an open, bleeding wound. They see a target." There was a heavy pause. Lila held her breath, her hand pressed to her mouth. "They are welcome to try," Vincent said. "Do not be a boy," Enzo snapped. "This is not about your pride. This is about the family. This is about the empire your father built. You are risking it." "For what? Redemption? Revenge? This is not our way. You clear the threat. You do not invite it home for dinner. End this. Send her away. Give her a new life 1,000 miles from here. Protect her, yes, but do not let her be the reason this family falls." "You are dismissed, Enzo," Vincent said, the words heavy with finality. "Vincent. Now." Lila heard the scrape of the chair, the heavy sigh of the old man, and the click of the door. She sat in the darkness of the study, the numbers on the screen in front of her blurring into meaningless shapes, a target, a liability, a bleeding wound. He was right. Enzo was right. The news reports, the audits, the sudden, escalating violence at the docks, it was all because of her. Vincent was a king, and she was the poisoned arrow lodged in his side. She thought of the woman he had failed to protect, the one who had given up. Lila was not giving up. She was doing what that woman could not. She was making the choice. She was saving him. She waited 2 hours until the silence from his office was absolute. She knew he was gone. He had a late meeting, one he took in a secure location beneath one of his restaurants. He would be gone for at least 3 hours. She moved with a quiet, desperate efficiency. She had no suitcases, so she used the expensive leather duffel bag that was in the back of her closet. She packed the simple, unbranded clothes he had bought her. She had no money of her own. Save for a few $100s Vincent had insisted she keep in her purse. She laid it on the pristine counter of the marble bathroom. She would not take his money. She left the watch he had given her, a simple, elegant timepiece, on her pillow. She put on the same shoes she had worn when she arrived at the courthouse. She was nothing. She had come with nothing, and she would leave with nothing. It was the only way to balance the scales. She walked through the silent, dark penthouse, a ghost in her own life. The main elevator was keyed to him and his security, but the service elevator, the one she had fled to in the stairwell, was her only way out. She pressed the call button, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The doors opened with a soft, hydraulic hiss. She stepped inside and turned to press the button for the lobby. A large hand shot out and clamped down on her wrist. Not hard, not to hurt, but to hold. Lila gasped, her head whipping around. Vincent was standing in the elevator car with her. He had not come from the penthouse. He had been waiting, in the shadows of the service hallway, as if he had known. He was not in a suit. He was in black jeans and a black Henley, his hair damp from the rain outside. He looked tired, and his eyes, fixed on her face, were darker and deeper than the night. He hadn't come from a meeting. He had come from the storm. "Lila," he said, and her name was a broken thing in his mouth. I heard Enzo," she whispered, the tears starting, hot and immediate. "He's right. I'm a target. I'm a weakness. I'm putting you in danger. I can't be the reason. I can't." He said nothing. He just looked at her, his gaze holding her, pinning her, seeing right through her skin to the terrified, fractured thing beneath. He let go of her wrist and his hand came up, his thumb brushing away a tear on her cheek. Then he reached past her, his arm brushing her shoulder, and pressed the button for the roof. "Vincent, no," she pleaded. "I have to." The elevator began to move up. "I know," he said, his voice quiet. The doors opened onto the rooftop. It was not a garden. It was a windswept, raw space, open to the sky. The rain was coming down, not a drizzle, but a cold, driving storm. The city was a billion shattered lights below them. He took her hand and pulled her out into the deluge. Within seconds, she was soaked, her thin sweater clinging to her, the wind whipping her hair across her face. "You're a liability!" he shouted over the wind, pulling her to the center of the roof. "Yes!" she cried, the rain mixing with her tears. "I am! Let me go! It's the only way to fix it!" "You're a weakness," he said, his hands finding her waist, pulling her flush against him. His body was a furnace in the cold rain. I know I am. Please, Vincent." He put his forehead against hers, his eyes burning into hers. "You are my liability," he said, his voice a low, fierce growl that cut through the storm. "You are my weakness. You are my target. You are mine." He grabbed her hand, the one that had been holding the duffel bag, which she had dropped by the elevator. He brought it to his lips. His clothes were soaked, the rain running in rivers off his face, but his grip was firm. He turned her hand over and kissed her knuckles, a hard, formal, almost feudal gesture. "I've been in the dark my entire life. Lila, I own the shadows. And you," he said, his gaze intense, "you are the only light I have ever seen. You think I will let you walk back into the night? You think I will let you put yourself out? No." He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, his mouth finding hers in the rain. It was not a kiss. It was an oath. It was desperate and angry and possessive, a raw, elemental claiming. It tasted of rain and whiskey and his own unique, dark promise. He was branding her, marking her as his in the middle of the storm. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathless, steam rising from their bodies in the cold air. He was breathing as hard as she was. He unzipped his jacket, the one he had just put on, and wrapped it around her, cocooning her in his warmth. "You listen to me," he said, his voice raw. "You are not a weakness. You are my goddamn armor. They think they can use you against me? Let them try. Let them all come." He held her face between his palms, his thumbs stroking her wet cheeks. "No one takes you from me. Not Carrick, not Enzo, not even you. Do you understand me?" She couldn't speak. She just nodded, a sob of relief, of terror, of belonging, shaking her entire body. "Now," he said, his voice softening just a fraction, "let's get you inside before you freeze." He picked up her abandoned duffel bag, slung it over his shoulder, and led her back to the elevator, his arm a steel bar around her waist. The call came 2 days later. Lila was in the office. Her office, the chill from the rooftop long gone, replaced by a new, simmering resolve. The caller ID was blocked. She answered, as she always did, with a crisp, "Mr. DeLuca's office. Lila, is that you?" Lila froze. The voice was thin, hesitant, and so achingly familiar. "Sarah? Oh God, Lila, I didn't know how to, He came to the apartment. A man in a suit." Lila's blood ran cold. "Who? Sarah, what did he do?" He offered me money." Sarah's voice broke. "He offered me $50,000. He said all I had to do was call you, to convince you to drop this, to say that Mom was sick and you needed to come home. He said you were ruining our family name. Sarah, are you okay?" Lila was on her feet, her hand gripping the phone. He gave me this," Sarah whispered. "He gave me a burner phone with one number in it, his number. He said I had 24 hours to make the call, but Lila, I saw his face. When he talked about you, he was like Trent. He was smiling. He thought I was just like them." The sobs came, heavy and racking. "I took the phone. Lila, I told him I'd do it, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I believed them. I believed the news. I believed them over you, my own sister. I'm trash." "No, Sarah, you're not," Lila said, her own tears starting. "You're just scared. Where are you?" "I'm downstairs," Sarah whispered. "In the lobby. I told the man at the desk I was here for For Mr. DeLuca. They looked at me like I was crazy, but I have to. Stay there, Lila said. Don't move. I'm coming. Lila met her sister in the sterile, high-security lobby. Sarah looked terrible. She was pale, her eyes red and swollen, her clothes rumpled. The moment she saw Lila, she collapsed, her arms wrapping around Lila's waist, holding on like a drowning woman. You were telling the truth, she sobbed into Lila's shirt. You were telling the truth. And I doubted you. I'm sorry. I am so sorry, Lila. Lila held her sister, her eyes closed, and for the first time in months, a piece of her old life, a piece she thought was gone forever, slotted back into place. When she brought Sarah upstairs, Vincent was waiting. He had heard. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the burner phone Sarah placed on his desk. He looked at the two sisters, one broken, one healing. He made a call. Rocco, he said, take Miss Moreno's sister home. Put 2 men on her building. No one gets in or out without your say. And find the man who gave her the phone. I want to have a conversation with him. After Sarah was safely gone, Vincent turned to Lila. The anger in his eyes was a controlled fire. He tried to bribe your family, he said. He tried to use your sister. He thought she was like him, Lila said, her voice shaking with a new kind of rage. He thought everyone was for sale. He's wrong, Vincent said. That night, the preparations for war began. The bribe was returned, not as money but as a message. The man who delivered it was found in his car, with a broken hand and a new, profound understanding of his mistake. Alliances were tested. Men who had been on Carrick's payroll for years suddenly found their loyalty. Reprioritized. Vincent didn't use threats. He used logic. Jackson Carrick, he explained to one city councilman, is a sinking ship. You can stay on board, or you can accept a lifeboat. The party was the final move. It was a charity gala held at one of his restaurants, the kind of event the city's elite couldn't afford to miss. Jackson Carrick, brazen as ever, was there. He didn't know it was his own wake. Lila was terrified. She hadn't been in a room like this since Ember. I can't, she said, staring at the black dress laid out on the bed. It was velvet, simple, and cut with the precision of a diamond. Vincent had had it custom made. Yes, you can, Vincent said, walking up behind her. He wasn't in a suit. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He looked like the god of the underworld. You're not the broken girl. Lila, you're the one who broke them. He fastened a simple, impossibly heavy diamond necklace around her throat. This, he whispered, his lips brushing her ear, is your crown. Wear it. When they walked into that ballroom, the music stopped, not all at once, but in a slow, dying wave as every head turned. Jackson Carrick, a glass of champagne in his hand, froze, his smile turning to a mask of hate. Lila did not shrink. She did not hide. Her sister believed her. The man beside her would burn the city for her. She lifted her chin, her poise absolute, and looked at the crowd, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She was not a queen. She was the one who had survived the dragon. And she was standing next to an even bigger one. They didn't move through the room. The room moved around them. Men who had ignored her, women who had whispered about her, now approached, their faces masks of polite, terrified respect. They called her Miss Moreno. They called him Mr. DeLuca. A slow jazz band was playing in the adjoining garden, under a canopy of stars. Vincent took her hand. Dance with me. He led her onto the small, candlelit dance floor. He pulled her close, his hand a firm, warm presence on the small of her back. They moved slowly, in their own perfect, silent world. They're all watching, she whispered against his chest. Let them watch, he murmured into her hair. He pulled back, just enough to look at her, his dark eyes tracing her features as if memorizing them. They all believe you now, he whispered, his voice for her alone. But I always did. Later that night, long after the party, after the last lie was told and the last alliance secured, they were in his room. The black dress was a pool of velvet on the floor. Lila was sitting on the bed, watching him. He was standing by the window, the moonlight tracing the powerful lines of his back. He was unbuttoning his shirt, and she saw them. Scars. Not just one. His back and chest were a roadmap of his life, a puckered white circle on his shoulder, a long, thin, silver line that ran across his ribs. She went to him, her bare feet silent. She put her hand on his chest, her fingers tracing the oldest, most faded scar, a starburst of pale skin just over his heart. "What?" "An old argument," he said, his voice quiet. "A lesson I learned too late. He was not just a monster. He was a man who had bled, just like her." She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to the scar. A soft, reverent kiss. "I believe you too," she whispered against his skin. He flinched, not from pain but from the sudden, unasked-for tenderness. She kissed the next scar, the long one on his ribs, her hand cupping his face. "You're not what they say you are. You're not what Enzo thinks." She kissed the small, puckered mark on his shoulder. "You're better." He looked down at her. His eyes, those dark, guarded windows, finally fully open. He didn't look like a killer. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a man who had just been saved. He lifted his hand, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly, and touched her face. "Lila," he breathed, and it was the sound of a prayer. He pulled her to him, and this time there was no anger, no storm, just a profound, desperate, healing need. Just when the tide seemed to be turning, the beast itself waded back ashore. Trent Carrick returned from his vacation. He didn't slink back. He arrived on a private jet, stepping onto the tarmac in broad daylight, wearing an expensive suit and a smile that dripped with unearned confidence. He was flanked by a legal team that cost more per hour than Lila had earned in her entire life. His father, Jackson, stood beside him, and together they held an impromptu press conference on the tarmac. "My son has returned, as we always said he would," Jackson boomed, his voice a performance of paternal outrage. "He has returned to face these ridiculous, baseless, and frankly, insane allegations. Allegations, I might add, that are being funded and coerced by a known criminal element." The press, predictable and hungry, turned this new narrative into a feeding frenzy. The story was no longer about a victim. It was about a feud. The headlines were brutal. "Carrick vs. DeLuca. Is waitress a victim or a pawn? Mafia Mall." Lila Moreno's story bought and paid for by underworld boss. Vincent DeLuca's protection called mafia-backed extortion. The shift was immediate and toxic. The goodwill Lila had felt, the sense of momentum, all of it evaporated. She was once again a liar, but this time she was also a gold digger, a manipulator, a gangster's property. The legal system, which had only just begun to creak open, slammed shut. The newly assigned prosecutor, feeling the political winds change, announced that due to new questions regarding the credibility of the primary witness, the case was being put on hold, pending further investigation. On hold, the two words felt like a death sentence. "It means it's over," Lila said, staring at the television screen in the penthouse. Her voice was flat, dead. "They won. Again, they just waited us out, and now I'm your whore, and you're just a criminal trying to extort them." Vincent was standing by the window wall, his back to her. He had been silent for 10 minutes, watching the smug face of Jackson Carrick on the screen. The only sign of his fury was the rigid line of his shoulders and the slow, steady clenching and unclenching of his right fist. He was a statue of controlled, vibrating rage. "It is not over," he said, his voice a low, terrifyingly calm rumble. "They are playing by their rules, so now I will play by mine." He turned, and his eyes were not the eyes of the man who had held her in the rain. They were the eyes of the man she had seen in the garage. They were cold, absolute, and devoid of mercy. "Lila," he said, "I am going out. Rocco will be outside your door. Do not, under any circumstances, leave this penthouse." "Vincent, what are you—" "I'm going to end this," he said. He walked past her, his movements precise, and did not look back. The Grand Orpheum Theater had been closed for 30 years. It was a rotting cathedral of plaster and velvet, a place where the city's elite had once gathered, now left to rats and ghosts. It was one of Vincent's properties, a forgotten asset on a dark, abandoned street. It was here he arranged the meeting. Jackson Carrick came, but not alone. He brought two of his own private security, large men in suits who looked nervous in the suffocating darkness. Vincent was waiting on the center of the stage, seated in a single dusty chair, as if he were the star of a one-man show. The only light came from a single, bare work bulb hanging from the rafters, casting long, grotesque shadows. Rocco and two other DeLuca men were phantoms in the wings. "This is beneath you. DeLuca," Jackson blustered, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast, empty space. "This theatrical nonsense. What do you want? More money? Is that what your little whore is demanding now?" Vincent didn't stand. He just watched Carrick approach. "I am going to give you a gift. Jackson, a one-time offer. You have, in your possession, a son who is a liability. He is broken, and he has now, finally, broken something he cannot pay to have fixed. My son did nothing but show poor judgment in his choice of women." "Your son is a predator," Vincent said, his voice dropping, and the temperature in the theater seemed to fall with it. "And you are the man who taught him he could be. You are the man who cleaned up his messes, who paid for his silence, who taught him that his name was a shield that could deflect all consequence." He stood up, the chair scraping loudly on the wooden stage. "The shield is cracked, and the consequences are me." He stepped forward into the single pool of light. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Here is the offer. You have 24 hours. You will hold a press conference. You will confess to covering up your son's actions. You will admit to the payoffs. You will admit to the intimidation. Your son will turn himself in and plead guilty to all charges. You will do this, and in return—" "In return for what?" Carrick scoffed, though a line of sweat was visible on his temple. "In return, you will be allowed to disappear," Vincent said. "You will take what money you can carry, and you will leave this city, this country, and you will never return. You will become a ghost. A better fate than you deserve." Jackson Carrick stared, then he began to laugh. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "You're insane. You Mafia trash. You think you can—" "What? Threaten me? Me? I own the police. I own the judges. I own this city. That girl is nothing. And you? You are a common criminal who has overplayed his hand." He straightened his tie, his smugness returning. "My lawyers will be in touch. This case is on hold. By this time next week, it will be gone, and your little pet project will be back on the street where she belongs. Now, if you'll excuse me." He turned to leave. "Jackson." Vincent's voice was soft. Carrick paused, his back still to the stage. "She is not a pet project," Vincent said. "She is not a pawn, and she is not— nothing." Carrick turned around, an irritated look on his face. "What?" "I gave you the offer," Vincent said, walking back into the shadows of the stage. "As a courtesy, but I knew you would refuse." He pulled his phone from his pocket. "You see, men like you only learn one way." He pressed a single button on his phone. "Release it all," he said, then hung up. "Release what?" Carrick said, his voice suddenly uncertain. "What did you do?" "Check your phone. Jackson," Vincent said, his voice a disembodied echo from the darkness. "The news is breaking. Right now." Carrick fumbled for his phone. His two bodyguards were doing the same. A push alert, another, a local investigative reporter. One known for her refusal to be bought had just posted a story. It was a flood. It wasn't just Lila. It was the two other women, their identities protected, but their stories told in harrowing detail. It was the grainy ATM footage, enhanced and analyzed. It was a leaked audio file of one of Carrick's fixers offering a bribe to Lila's sister, Sarah. It was a high-definition copy of the surveillance footage from Club Ember, the footage Jackson thought he had destroyed. You, Carrick stammered, his face a mottled, terrified red. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter where I got it," Vincent said. It matters that everyone has it now. You didn't just build a new skyscraper. Jackson, you built a gallows, and you just put your own neck in the noose. You'll pay for this, Carrick shrieked. No, Vincent said, stepping back into the light. His face was impassive. You will. Now get out of my theater. The city exploded. The case wasn't just on hold anymore. It was a 5-alarm fire. The district attorney's office, facing a tidal wave of public outrage and undeniable evidence, was forced to act. The case was not just reopened, it was fast-tracked, and Lila Moreno was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury. The hearing would be televised. She was in the penthouse when the papers were served. She stared at the official document, her hands shaking. Testify. On live television? It's their last move, Vincent said, his jaw tight. They couldn't bury the case, so they're going to try to bury you. They want to put you on that stand and tear you apart in front of the whole world. They want to make you look like a liar, like the press is saying. Lila looked at him, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it made her nauseous. I can't, Vincent, I can't. They'll look at me. Everyone. He took her hands. They were ice cold. Yes, you can, he said. I will be there. I will be in the front row. They will have to look at me while they talk to you. She shook her head, pulling her hands from his. She backed away, pacing the room like a trapped animal. No, that's what they want. They want to make this about you, about the Mafia boss and his mall. They want to ask me about you, about how we met, about us. They'll use you to discredit me. He was silent. He knew she was right. She stopped pacing and turned to face him, her entire body trembling, but her gaze was resolute. I have to do it alone. Lila, no, I will not let you. You will not let me? She snapped, a fire he had never seen in her eyes. This isn't your choice. Vincent, this isn't your fight. Not this part, and this is mine. They took my name. They took my life. This is my one chance to take it back. If you are in that room, it's not my testimony. It's yours. I have to do this. Alone. He looked at her, at this woman who had been barefoot and broken in a motel hallway. He saw the steel that had been forged in her. He had wanted to be her shield, but she had become her own sword. He gave a single, pained nod. Rocco and 2 men will take you. They will be at the door, but I will not be in the room. The day of the hearing was a circus. The courthouse steps were a sea of news vans, reporters, and protesters. Lila, dressed in a simple, severe dark gray suit, stepped out of the armored car, flanked by Rocco. She took one step, then chaos. A man, his face hidden by a baseball cap, broke from the crowd. It wasn't a reporter, and he was moving too fast, too low. Lila Moreno, he shouted. And as he lunged, Lila saw the glint of a needle in his hand. Rocco, she screamed. Rocco moved with a speed that defied his size. He shoved Lila behind him, using his body as a shield, just as the man lunged. At the same time, 2 other men, Vincent's men who had been hidden in the crowd, converged. One grabbed the man's arm, twisting it until the needle flew. The other drove a fist into the man's kidneys. It was over in 3 seconds. The police, who had been holding the press line, swarmed in, pinning the man to the ground. Lila was hyperventilating, her back pressed against Rocco's. He failed, Rocco said, his voice a rumble. He pushed her forward. Get inside. Now. The boss is on his way. No, Lila cried, grabbing his arm. No, Rocco, you tell him. You tell him I'm fine. I'm fine. You tell him he cannot come. You promise me, Rocco, promise me. Rocco's face was a mask of conflict. He hated this, but he nodded. He pushed her through the doors, inside. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick and silent. Lila walked to the stand, her legs feeling like water. She sat. She swore the oath. The prosecutor for the Carricks, a slick, cruel man, began his cross-examination, and it was brutal. Miss Moreno, you were fired for theft, were you not? No, I was not. You were given $10,000 by the Carrick family. Yes or no? It was hush money. I refused. And when that failed, you went looking for a new benefactor, didn't you? A more powerful one? No, That's not what happened. Isn't it true you are currently living in the penthouse of Vincent DeLuca? Lila's face flushed. Yes, and in what capacity? Do you reside there? The lawyer sneered. Are you his assistant? The room snickered. Lila's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the jury, at the mocking face of the lawyer. She felt the walls closing in. She was losing. They were doing it. They were tearing her apart. She stammered, the tears welling, her throat closing, and then the courtroom doors slammed open. Get your hands off me! It was Vincent's voice, a roar, a sound of such pure, primal rage that the entire courtroom recoiled. Lila's head snapped up. Vincent was in the doorway, his face a mask of black fury. He was not in a suit. He was in the clothes he had thrown on. His hair wild. He was fighting. 2 massive courthouse security guards were holding his arms, their feet literally leaving the floor as he dragged them forward. Vincent, the judge yelled, banging his gavel. Order, order, Mr. DeLuca, you are in contempt. You son of a bitch. Vincent roared, ignoring the judge, his eyes locked on the smirking lawyer. You look at me. You ask me those questions. You... He was armed. The guard fumbling with him saw it. He's got a gun! Pandemonium! People screamed, ducking under benches. The judge disappeared. Vincent ripped his arm free from one guard and lunged forward. Vincent, no! It was Lila's voice. A scream that cut through the chaos. He stopped. He was 10 feet from the lawyer, one arm free, the other still gripped by a terrified guard. He turned his head, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. He looked at her. He saw her. She was on her feet. Her face was streaked with tears, but her back was ramrod straight. She was not broken. She was furious. The wildness in his eyes resurged, replaced by a dawning. Something... Lila, he breathed. Get him out, Lila said, her voice shaking but full of steel. She wasn't looking at Vincent. She was looking at the judge. Get him out of here. This is my testimony. So security, now reinforced by 4 more officers, swarmed him. This time, he didn't fight. He let them restrain him. He kept his eyes locked on Lila as they dragged him, backwards, out of the courtroom. The room was in chaos. The judge was apoplectic. Recess! We are in recess! No. Lila's voice, clear and strong. Everyone stopped. The judge, the jury, the lawyer. I am not in recess, Lila said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, leaving a black mascara streak on her face. She looked at the jury. My relationship with Mr. DeLuca is not on trial here. My firing for theft is not on trial. What is on trial is what happened in that storeroom. She turned her gaze on the Carrick lawyer, her eyes now as hard as Vincent's. You asked me in what capacity I reside with him. I will tell you. I reside with him as the one person in this entire goddamn city who believed me. He was not the first man I told. He was just the first man who wasn't a coward or a liar. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Now, do you want to talk about the evidence? Or do you want to keep asking me about my personal life? Because I can, and I will. Sit here all day. I have nothing left to lose. When the hearing was finally over, hours later, the hallway was clear. The press had been pushed outside. The jury was deliberating. Lila walked out of the courtroom, her body so numb she felt like she was floating. He was there. He was sitting on a hard wooden bench, alone. The guards were gone. He had, no doubt, convinced them to leave. He was slouched, his head in his hands. He heard her footsteps and looked up. His face was a wreck of shame, relief, and a love so profound it hurt to look at. She walked over to him. She didn't speak. She just stood, waiting. He looked up at her. This 5'5" woman who had just stared down a room full of monsters. The woman he had almost failed by losing control. Slowly, awkwardly, the most powerful man in Easton City slid off the bench and knelt on the dirty linoleum floor. He didn't take her hand. He didn't propose. He just knelt, his head bowed. You are braver than all of us, he said, his voice thick with a raw, broken humility. You are braver than me. You are everything. Lila looked down at the top of his dark head. She reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it on his hair. "Get up, Vincent," she whispered. "Get up and take me home." That night, the penthouse was not a fortress. It was a sanctuary. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had been to war. He stood in the bedroom, watching her. She walked to him, unbuttoning her suit jacket, her hands shaking with the adrenaline crash. He tried to drug me, on the steps. Vincent's eyes closed, a spasm of pain crossing his face. "I know. You came. I lost," he said, the word tasting like poison. "I lost control. Lila, I almost ruined you. You saved me," she whispered. He was winning. And then I saw your face. I saw you, and you reminded me what I was fighting for." She stepped closer, her hands going to his shirt. "Don't let me go," she whispered, a desperate plea. "Not tonight, please. Vincent, don't let me go." He pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers with a desperate, starved urgency. This was not the slow burn of their first night. This was not the angry claiming in the rain. This was a lifeline. This was two people who had almost drowned, clinging to each other, finding air in each other's mouths. It was fire and relief. It was a desperate, breathless reaffirmation of life. His hands were in her hair, at the small of her back, pulling her so close there was no space, no air, no doubt. Her nails dug into his shoulders, holding on, anchoring herself. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, their bodies fitting together, a perfect, desperate lock. He carried her to the bed, never breaking the kiss, their clothes a hindrance, an obstacle to be torn away. It was urgent and fiery and so profoundly relieving. Every touch was a statement. You are alive, you are here, you are safe. Every kiss was a promise. I will not let you go. I will not let you fall. They clung to each other in the darkness, two survivors, their bodies slick with sweat, their breathing ragged. She was a lifeline to his humanity. He was a lifeline to her safety. And in the silent, moonlit room, they finally held on. Lila's testimony did not just go viral. It was a detonation. The raw, unedited footage of her steel-eyed conviction, juxtaposed with Vincent's chaotic, protective rage, rewrote the entire narrative. She was no longer a victim, a moll, or a liar. She was a survivor. The public, finally seeing the unvarnished truth, was ravenous. The grand jury deliberated for less than 20 minutes. Trent Carrick was arrested the following day, not quietly, but in a public spectacle at his father's high-rise. The charges were not just for the assault on Lila, but for the two prior cases the private investigator had uncovered. The dam of money and influence had broken, and the flood of consequences was absolute. Jackson Carrick, facing the ruin of his empire and a dozen investigations into his own business practices of bribery and intimidation, did what all cowards do. He ran. He boarded a private jet under a false name, fleeing the country before the federal warrants could be served. He was a hunted man, a ghost with $1 billion price tag, but he was gone. Lila's name was, in an instant, cleared. More than cleared. It was sanctified. She was the woman who had brought down the Carricks, the one who had stared down the city's most powerful monsters and won. Her old life, the one she had fought to reclaim, was gone. It was replaced by something new and terrifying: fame. The offers began to pour in. Book deals with 7-figure advances, exclusive television interviews with reporters who had once mocked her, endorsement opportunities for women's advocacy groups, clothing lines, even a ridiculous offer to be the face of a home security system. She sat in the penthouse, which had become her office, her sanctuary, and her home, and looked at the stack of proposals Vincent's assistant had compiled. "No," she said. "No, to..." "Which one?" the assistant asked, confused. "All of them," Lila said, pushing the pile away. "I didn't do this to become a brand. I did this to get my life back, not to sell it." She turned down every offer, every book, every interview. She issued one simple, written statement to the press. "My name has been cleared. The truth is out. That is all I have to say." While she was building a wall against the world, Vincent was, for the first time in his life, tearing his down. The Carrick affair had shown him the value of a public spotlight, but also the deep, cancerous rot in the city's foundation. He had files, decades of files, payoffs to dirty cops, IOUs from judges, blackmail on city councilmen. It was the leverage he had used to build his empire in the shadows, one by one. He began to leak those files, not with his name, but through anonymous, untraceable drops to the same investigative reporter who had broken Lila's story. He handed over video evidence. He gave them ledgers. He delivered, gift-wrapped, every dirty official who had ever taken a Carrick bribe, or, more importantly, a DeLuca one. The FBI, forced into action, created a new public corruption task force. Vincent was, in effect, pruning his own garden, burning the diseased branches. He began the slow, arduous process of pulling his empire from the shadows, divesting from the sanitation and security rackets, and pouring his resources into the legitimate fronts. He was, in his own way, seeking a different kind of truth. One crisp, clear afternoon in the fall, Lila took Rocco and a driver to her old neighborhood. She hadn't been back since the day she had been evicted from the Easton Motor Inn. Her old apartment building looked smaller, grayer. The landlord, seeing her, nearly fainted, but she just smiled and said she was there to collect her things. Her apartment was as she had left it, only coated in a thick, uniform layer of dust. It was a time capsule of her old life. The unpaid bills were still on the counter. The cheap, polyester comforter was still rumpled on her bed. It smelled of stale air and old regrets. She walked into her small, cramped bathroom, the mirror over the sink, the one she had stared into so many times. Her face bruised, her eyes red, was still there. It was cheap, and the silvering was starting to peel, a jagged crack running from the top corner to the center. She looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was not the same woman who had left. Her hair was healthier, her skin clearer, but it was her eyes. They were different. They were not the haunted, terrified eyes of the girl who had fled. They were calm. They were still. They were, she realized, Vincent's eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had seen the worst and had refused to blink. She expected to cry. She expected the wave of trauma, of sadness, of loss, but nothing came. It was just a room. It was just a mirror. It was just a ghost, and it no longer had any power over her. She didn't cry. She turned to leave, and he was there. Vincent was standing in the hallway, his large frame filling the narrow space. He was in a suit, looking impossibly out of place in this crumbling, dusty apartment. He hadn't made a sound. "You're here," she said, not surprised. "I am," he said. His eyes flicked to the broken mirror, then back to her. He understood. "I told you I could come alone," she said, walking toward him. "I know," he said, not moving. "I know you can, but you never have to." He didn't try to help. He didn't try to comfort her. He just watched, his hands in his pockets, as she walked to the front door, placed her old key on the kitchen counter, and pulled the door shut, closing that chapter of her life with a quiet, final click. They didn't go back to the penthouse, not right away. "I want to show you something," he said. He drove them himself, an hour outside the city, into the mountains, where the air was clean and the sound of traffic was replaced by the sound of wind in the pines. The lake was a sheet of dark blue glass, and nestled on a private, wooded point was a house. It was not a mansion. It was a small, modern house, built of glass and stone and warm, dark wood. It was simple, strong, and beautiful. "What is this?" she asked, stepping out of the car. "It's a house," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I've owned the land for 10 years. I was waiting. For what?" He looked at her, his dark eyes tracing her profile. "I didn't know. They bought the lake house, or rather, he transferred the deed, putting it in her name. He sold the penthouse 2 months later. He opened a new firm, the DeLuca Construction and Development Group, a fully legitimate, bonded and insured company. He used his old crews, the ones who were loyal to him, and he started bidding on city contracts, this time, without the bribes. And Lila began to paint again. She had studied art long ago, before survival had forced her to pick up a cocktail tray. In the lake house, there was a small room with a window that faced the water, and the light was perfect. Vincent had it converted into a studio. He filled it with canvases, with brushes, with every color of oil paint she could ever want. She painted the lake. She painted the trees. She painted the storm clouds that gathered in the afternoons. She painted, and the last of the bruises, the ones on the inside, began to fade. Their life was quiet. It was not a romance novel. It was something real. It was two damaged people building a new, quiet world, but the past was never truly gone. Lila woke up, gasping. Her heart was a trapped bird in her chest, beating against her ribs. The sheets were damp, tangled around her legs. "Lila!" Vincent's voice. A low, calm rumble in the darkness. He was already sitting up, his hand on her back, a warm, solid, grounding weight. I, she stammered, trying to pull air into her lungs. "The storeroom, I couldn't scream." "Shh, you're here," he said. He didn't turn on the light. He just moved, pulling her from her side of the bed, across the sheets and onto his lap. He settled her against his chest, her back to his front, his arms caging her, his chin resting on the top of her head. He was a furnace of warmth and solid, living muscle. "You're here," he repeated, his voice vibrating through her. "You are not there. You are in our house. You are in our bed. You are with me." "It felt so real," she whispered, her hands gripping his forearms. He began to kiss her, not her lips, but her shoulder, her neck, the side of her head. They were slow, gentle, absent-minded kisses. They were promises. They were physical proof that she was not there. She was here. "You're safe," he murmured against her skin, his lips brushing her temple. "You always will be. I am here." He held her like that, not speaking, just holding her, his lips a warm presence on her skin, his arms a shield, until the frantic rhythm of her heart slowed to match the steady, powerful beat of his. She didn't go back to sleep. She just rested. And for the first time, the nightmare did not win. A year passed, then another. The invitation was on thick. Cream-colored cardstock, the Easton City Women's Advocacy Gala. They were honoring her, and they had asked her to be the keynote speaker. "I can't," she told Vincent, holding the card. "Why not?" he asked, not looking up from the blueprints he was reading. I'm a painter. I live in a lake house. I'm not her. I'm not that woman anymore. I'm not a symbol." He finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Yes, you are," he said, his voice soft. "You're just not a victim. There's a difference." She stood on the stage in a simple dark green dress, the lights hot on her face. The ballroom was filled with hundreds of people, the city's new, cleaned-up elite. She was not the same woman who had trembled on the witness stand. She looked at the microphone. She had a speech, written and discarded. "A few years ago," she began, her voice clear and strong, carrying through the silent room. "I was a different person. I was a person who nobody believed. The police, my friends, my own family. I was told I was a liar. I was told I was unstable. I was told I was a thief." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "And the worst part," she said, her voice dropping, "was that I almost believed them." She took a breath. "The world will tell you who you are. If you let it, it will brand you. It will put you in a box. But the truth doesn't care about the world. It just is." She looked to the wings, where a shadow was watching. "I was told no one believed me, but they were wrong, because first, I believed myself. I knew my truth, and I held on to it, even when it was dark. And then," she smiled, a small, real smile. "Then, someone else did too. And that changed everything." The applause was a thunderous, rising wave. She walked off the stage, her heart full, the noise of the crowd fading behind her. He was waiting in the shadows backstage, his tuxedo as impeccable as ever. He didn't speak. He just took her hand, the one that wasn't holding her notes, and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles. The same gesture he had made in the rain on the rooftop, not a claim, but an oath. "You saved yourself, Lila," he said, his voice a low rumble. "For her alone. I just showed up when it mattered." She smiled, entwining her fingers with his. "You showed up," she agreed, "and you stayed." He led her through the back exit to the waiting limo. The city lights were bright, the air cold. They got in, the door closing with a heavy, solid sound, sealing them in their own, quiet world. He didn't let go of her hand. He held it in his lap, his thumb idly stroking her skin. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the familiar, solid strength of him, and let out a long, slow breath. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding into the night, leaving the gala, the speeches, and the past behind. Lila watched the gritty, beautiful, haunted skyline of Easton City fade in the rearview window. It was not her home, not anymore. Home was the man beside her. Home was the hand she was holding. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Lila and Vincent. I hope it kept you on the edge of your seat. This is your novelist, and I have a small favor to ask. I love knowing where these stories land. So, in the comments below, please tell me what city or what country you are listening from. And if you love this story and you want more, just like it, please be sure to subscribe to our channel, Mafia Romance Stories. Finally, I want to hear your thoughts, in English, in the comments. What was your favorite part? What did you feel when Vincent walked into that courtroom? Your words are what keep me writing. Thank you again. Until the next story,